What's up, Dragon Nation? I'm Rich with Dragon Nation Gaming. Welcome to Space Engineers, and the first in a long line of tutorials I'm going to be putting out over the next few months. So you decided to buy yourself Space Engineers, and let me be the first to express my condolences for the many hours that you're about to kill playing this game. So after installing the game, you decide to play it. And when you get into the menus, you notice there are a lot of options. It can be a little bit overwhelming, but if you stick to the basic stuff, it's not so bad. So there's a few things we need to go over in this episode. One of those is the worlds, the respawn worlds, and then also the respawn ships to help you get started and give you a little bit of knowledge on how to get started. So let's go ahead and get this one started. So eventually, when you play the game after a while and you start to learn the different objects that you can build with, you start to learn how you could work them together to make really, really dumb contraptions, kind of like this one. This is my tunnel boring machine. This is an automated machine which will bore through a mountain, and it will automatically build the road as it goes through. Now, this thing is really complicated. It took me months to figure out how to get this thing working, and it works pretty well. It is on the Steam Workshop right now, but this you don't need to worry about right now. You're just learning the game. You're trying to learn the basics so you can get up to a point where you could build dumb shit like this. So the first thing you'll have to do is come to the main menu screen and hit New Game. Now, there's a bunch of options that you'll see. There's 3 different tabs up at the top. You have Scenarios, Workshop, and Custom Game. The ones that you want to start out with if you're a brand new player who just got the game is go to Scenarios and play these 2. First Jump and Learning to Survive. This will give you a better idea of some of the stuff that you can do in the game and what you need to do in order to survive long enough to get up to the point where you're building stupid stuff like the tunnel boring machine. So what you want to do after you play those is go over to Custom Game. But first, let's go over the Workshop. Now, on the Steam Workshop, there is a lot of mods. There's a very good modding community for space engineers, and Workshop are, different worlds that other players have created that you could join in, or not join in, but you could actually load into and see what they've done. But what you want to start out with is a custom game. Now, there's a few different options here as well. There's an alien planet which starts you with a brand new base. This base is set up for you already. I recommend not using that. Crash Red Ship, I recommend learning a little bit about the game before you go into that. Dead Drop Arena is for those new players who want to get their friends into a battle. There's some fighters you guys could fight against each other with. Earth Planet, it starts you out with a brand new base on the Earth-like planet. Empty World is for creative. We'll go over that at some other point. Green Station starts you with the station with a bunch of other ships. You could go in there and check out some of the stations and the other ships, but that save is really old. So there's a lot of stuff in the game right now that will not be in that station. Lone Survivor is where a lot of the older players started out. This was before we had planets in the game. It was right at the beginning. I don't recommend starting with that either because it actually skips a few things that you do need to know. Mars-like planet starts you on the Mars planet with a starter base. Like I said, I don't recommend starting with that one. Moon base does the same thing. You start out with a starter base. I don't recommend it. Red ship, that starts you out with a station kind of like Lone Survivor. this one right here, but it has everything in it. It has a bunch of ships that if you want to, you could go ahead and save the blueprint for them and use those ships until you can come up with your own. Rival platforms is for you and a friend to go in. Each one of you will have your own platform and you can battle to see who is the best. Well, not the best, just whoever is faster. But star system is the one that we want to start out with. Now over here on the right hand side, these are the settings for that world. Now what this will start out with is nothing. There is nothing in the world at all except for the planets, the asteroids, and of course the sun for lighting. Then once you're ready to start, it'll just spawn you into a respawn ship so that way you can get started. Here pretty soon we'll be going over the different types of respawn ships and give you a better understanding of what's available in those ships. Over here on the right side, like I said, this is all your settings. I recommend for right now not changing any of the settings until you become better at the game. Just go ahead and just start and get an idea of the basics. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here you could change, like the name, the description of that world. Unless you're doing a multiplayer server, your own multiplayer server, I wouldn't worry about that. Game mode. You can go into creative and kind of practice with some of the blocks and see what they do. But keep in mind, creative and survival do not have the same mechanics. So if something works in creative, it might not work in survival. Then your online mode. This one's kind of important for updating the game. When you're in game, you might not have real-time updates if you're offline. That's with your resources and stuff like that. The counters don't change when you're in offline mode. Then you have private, which means you have to send people invitations in order to join the server that you're in. You can play co-op or you can go on a multiplayer server. But right now we're just going to go in single player because you're trying to learn how to play the game. Now you can go into multiplayer and find some pretty good guys that know how to play the game and they can show you how to do it. The problem is this game isn't very good with multiplayer, so I don't recommend doing that until you learn a little bit about the game. Then this one is for friends, so your friends on Steam can automatically join you whenever you're online. And then you have public, where anybody could join. And then you have the max amount of players. It goes all the way from 2, which is you and another friend, all the way up to 16. That's you and 15 other people. Mods. Let's not get into mods. You're a brand new player. I suggest getting into survival, learning the game before you start messing around with the mods. It's a really good idea. Then you have the advanced settings. This one can be daunting unless you know what you're going for. This is the way you can set the different settings as far as character inventory size. You can make it a little bit bigger if you want to carry more. Now, a lot of people will talk a little bit of shit if people up these numbers. But the truth is, by leaving these down at, like, say, realistic or ×3, all that makes the game do is it makes the game more grindy. It doesn't make it any more difficult. So my suggestion is bring them all the way up to 10. But it's up to you. It's your world. Do it how you want to do it. Environment hostility. As a brand new player, I recommend keeping this on safe. What this is meteors. Now, of course, normal will give you a few meteors. Cataclysm will make the meteors show up more often. And Armageddon, which I don't recommend, meteors will continuously come and destroy your base. So that one for new players, I don't recommend using that until you want to do something new. You're getting kind of bored and you want to try something else. Asteroid amount. This one's very important depending on what type of PC you have. Now, if you have a beast of a PC and you're not too worried about lag and stuff like that, just go down to infinite high density. This will set how many asteroids are in the game. Now, the game is procedural, which means as long as you keep traveling, the asteroids will continue to spawn in. We'll get into asteroids and everything like that later on. Now, I have a really good PC, so I just do infinite high density. When you're in single player, it's okay to do this, but if you're playing with multiple people on the same server, maybe normal or maybe go a little bit lower. It's all up to your PC. If you do have trouble with lag a little bit, that's one of the things you could do to make it a little bit better. Sound mode. You have arcade, which means the sound is persistent no matter if you're in space or down on the surface. Now, in real life, you can't hear anything in space. There's no atmosphere to allow sound waves to travel. So, realistic, actually, when you're in space and you have your helmet on, makes it so you don't hear some of the sounds. You still hear a little bit, but not as much. Arcade keeps it to where everything is heard. World size. This one I haven't messed with in a really long time. This you can set your world size, how big the world is going to be. Right now it's set to unlimited, which means it's persistent. No matter how far I travel, asteroids will still spawn in. Now you can set it to 100 kilometers, 50 kilometers, 20, or 10, depending on your PC. Now this is another one of those options which if your game becomes a little bit laggy, you can go ahead and change this. But so far the game runs pretty good with unlimited, so go ahead and leave it. View distance is the amount of distance you're able to view objects like asteroids. I recommend keeping that at 15 kilometers. Now this is also one that's kind of hard on your PC, so if you don't have that great of a PC, just go ahead and turn it down. Now 50 kilometers is a big performance hit. I've never actually done that. I keep mine at 15. It seems to work out pretty well. Respawn ship cooldown. That's cooldown for respawn ships, kind of like games like Rust and stuff like that. If you die, every time you die, you have to wait longer to respawn. That one, I just keep that off. Sun rotation. When you're a brand new player, you haven't figured out the mechanics of the game yet, I recommend turning that off. Now, when you become a little bit more experienced at the game, go ahead and turn that on. It's a nice little fun thing to do. Then you can set the day duration. Max objects. This is how much trash is in your world. This is also dependent on your PC. If you have a good PC, you could turn it up a little bit. If not, you could turn it down. Now, I just keep it at the default. I don't really worry about it. I try not to leave a lot of trash in the world. Block limits. If you're in single player, this one will not matter, so you can go ahead and shut it off. It'll let you know that block limits are set to ensure good performance, but if you're playing single player, it's not going to matter all that much. If you're in multiplayer and you're playing with friends, you might want to go ahead and set that block limit, because people get a little overzealous in building. Then you have the max ship size, which if you have the block limit set, you can go ahead and set that. Max blocks per player and total PCU. Alright, max backup saves. This is how many backup saves you will have in a game. So, say you have the game on autosave, and the game saved, and then right after it saved, something happened, something broke. Now, the game is still buggy. There are a lot of bugs in the game, so eventually something will get destroyed and you'll have no idea why. Now, the thing with that is, let's say everything was fine before the save, but right after the save, everything got destroyed. So with the backup saves, you could go back to an older save and restart from there. Optimal spawn distance is how far away people spawn from you if you're playing in multiplayer. So if you're in a world, they will actually spawn at least 16,000 kilometers away from you. That's the way I have it set. You can set that to more if you want. That's also dependent on PC usage. If you have a decent PC, you could actually set that limit higher. Then all these selections are up to you. I'm not going to go into them because there's a lot of stuff. But if you need information, just go ahead and go on the wiki, get more information on all this stuff. So let's go back in the world, because now it's time to go over respawn ships. There's a lot to go over with those, so let's get to that. Alright, so you got your settings set, you have the world exactly like you want it. The first thing that will happen when you load into the game is you'll be confronted with this screen right here. This is the respawn screen. This is where you select where you will be starting your game. So you have a few different drop pods, or a few different spawn ships. This one right here is the basic one. This one is on any planet or moon with atmosphere. This one is called the drop pod. Now there's a second one which you get when you're on the moon. The moon does not have atmosphere, but they do give you an option to spawn on the moon, and you start with this. It's pretty much the exact same thing as the drop pod, but with wheels. So the drop pods are on planets with atmosphere, and then you have the wheeled drop pod, which is the one for the moon. Then you have this one right here, which is the one if you want to start out in space. This is the one that I recommend if you're a brand new player. When you get onto a planet, there's a few other mechanics that you will need to learn in order to survive on the planet. Things like gravity, which are very important to learn. But if you're a new player, it's better to start out in space so you don't have to deal with those. It's a little bit easier. Then you have the spacesuit, which is just you in your spacesuit, which is only for creative. Do not start out that way because you will start with nothing and you won't be able to process anything to make, well, anything. So the one I recommend starting with is the space pod. Now, if you die in the game and you already have a base set up and you come to this respawn screen, you will see other places to spawn. These are medical rooms and stuff like that that I already have set up. So this is an example of the different types of pods that you have when you spawn into the game. Now we're going to go over those. I went ahead and set them up so that way I can show you the internals and show you what is available to you when you first spawn in. So the first one I'd like to go over are the drop pods. These are the little ones which drop on planets or moons with atmosphere. And then that one right there is the one for the moon. Now if we take a look at them, you do see that there is a seat, and I'll show you how they're pretty much the exact same thing. And it does have some light and some thrusters. We'll not go into that because this one has a parachute. When you first spawn into this pod, it'll start you out in the middle of the air, dropping to the surface. Do not panic. Do not worry about anything. That right there is a parachute, and you will land somewhat softly. Not always, but sometimes. And this one is the one on the moon. Now, the one on the moon will start you on the ground. You don't have to worry about any of that. This one does not have a parachute. It has a gyroscope, so that way when you're on the planet, you can go ahead and turn it around. It's better to have a gyroscope when you're driving a rover. Now, when it comes to being able to survive in the game, this drop pod right here, this is all the mechanics that are in that pod that help you survive. So in the back, we'll go ahead and start. This is your survival kit. Now the survival kit, if you come up to the screen and hold the left mouse button or hold down F, this will give you power, oxygen, hydrogen, and also if you take a little bit of damage, it will heal you up. Now this one is very important. If this is damaged or it's missing, you will not be able to respawn at that ship. Now later on I'll show you there's one other thing you could use in place of a survival kit, but for respawning and also production. So this does have an inventory space. In the beginning of the game, this is the only item you will have to produce, so that way you can build. So definitely make sure this thing doesn't become damaged. Protect it with your life because you pretty much are. Now, of course, for anything to get running, you need power. Right now, this ship is using a battery to produce the power so that way you can get stuff processed and use some of the other items that are available. Now, these two right here are not important. This is a beacon, which shows you your location. I recommend using antennas. They're a little bit better. You can communicate with other ships. The beacon doesn't do anything. It's just a beacon. Then a timer block, which I'll have to make a video on those at some point. So the survival kit, if I go ahead and grab one, when it comes to small grid ships, that's also another thing I need to go into. When it comes to small grid ships, there's two different types of access points. This is where conveyors have to be connected. Now, we will be going into that later on. So this one has, as you can see, the two squares on the left and right side, those are small access points. If I turn this around, that right there is a large access point. It's very important when you're trying to connect things together. So keep that in mind. So the survival kit has the small access on the front. You can tell because on this side, there's the large access point. So from the bottom, it has a conveyor junction, which goes up to a conveyor, which goes up to the parachute. Now the parachute does require canvas in order to work, so keep that in mind if you put that on your ships. What this does is we needed that canvas to be passed into the parachute because you can't do it by hand. That's why the conveyors pass it up. Then right here in the middle you have a small cargo container which is connected to that conveyor junction because of the access points. Let me go ahead and grab one of those real quick. If I could drag it down. That becomes difficult at some point. So the small cargo container has access in the front and access in the back. That's it. That's all it has, just the two. So the small cargo container right there, which is the only thing that you have on this drop pod, which you can keep inventory in. Now that's connected to the access point of this right here. This is an O2H2 generator. This will turn ice into oxygen and hydrogen. You might see them as O2H2, as we can see right here. So O2 is oxygen, H2 is hydrogen. Now, of course, oxygen is, well, it's oxygen. You need it in order to keep your character alive. H2, hydrogen, is used for power and thrusters. Later on, we'll go into power once we get into that pod. But the thrusters that I'm using right now to move around, if I turn them off, as you can see, I cannot move. And if I turn it back on, using X, I can go ahead and move a little bit. Because you can learn all that by going into the main menu and actually looking through that and getting all the controls yourself. I've done a video on that and it takes a long time. There are a lot of controls to this game. So once again, the O2H2 generator is to make oxygen and hydrogen. It is connected by conveyor to the survival kit. Since it is connected to the O2H2 generator, that means the survival kit is now supplied with oxygen and hydrogen. If we go over here to this one, there should be a little bit of ice in it. Now, the O2H2 generator works with ice. In order to make it work to create the oxygen and the hydrogen, it requires ice. I hope there's some in this one. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you'll see a few numbers that are lined up top to bottom. The plus sign is your health. It's at 100%. The O2 is your oxygen. It's at 74. The little lightning looking thing, that is your power. It's at 70. And then H2 is your hydrogen for your suit thrusters. Right now that's at 95. If I come to the survival kit and I hold down the left mouse button, you'll see that all those numbers go up. That's because the O2H2 generator is connected to the survival kit. So we are able to get oxygen and hydrogen from that. So when it comes to the drop pod, that's pretty much it. You just have an O2 generator, you got power, O2H2 generator, I'm sorry. You got power, and you have a survival kit for producing and for respawn. So that is the same thing in the drop pod and in this drop pod for the moon. The next one we need to go over is the space pod. Now this is the one that I recommend that you start in. Now there are a few things that you really need to keep in mind when using this. In space, all we have for thrust or to move around are ion thrusters. Ion thrusters are not very powerful, not vanilla ones. Once you get into mods, you can get more powerful ones, but for right now, these ones suck. They do suck pretty bad. But if we go to the pod, we can go ahead and go through some of the things that this thing does have. Now, of course, with large grids, you have other options like this piece of crap right here. This is an air vent. What that does is it takes O2, and if you have a room that is airtight, it will put oxygen into that room. So you can take off your helmet, walk around, and not have to worry about it. As soon as you open up a door to space, though, you will start taking damage. So if we go in here, I don't think I have any gravity, do I? No, I don't. If we go in here, right now, as you can see, this room is not airtight because I need to close the doors. But if we go up here, this is where the vent is, right in the ceiling. Now, the vent has a few different lights. Right now, the light is showing yellow. That means the room is not airtight. If we go to the control and hit the left mouse button, you'll see right here, room pressure not pressurized. What we need to do is we need to close the doors. And now, as you can see, the lights have turned green. and oxygen started to flow out of the vent. If we go to the control panel, room pressure 100%, because we are pressurized. As soon as I open the doors back up, the oxygen will escape. You can see that little cloud right there, and the light will go back to yellow because this room is no longer pressurized. So that's one option you have when you start building with large grids. Now, when I talk about grids means either a ship or a station. So right now that ship is a grid. This base right here, this platform, is a grid. That small drop pod is a grid. That drop pod is a grid. This one is another type of grid. So we have the platform, which is a grid in its own. But because of the rotor, which the head of a rotor counts as a separate grid, this right here is considered a subgrid because it's connected to the main grid. Now there's a couple different ways of connecting a subgrid: by a piston, a connector, a rotor, and I think that's it. So starting at the beginning, just like we did with the drop pod mechanics, we're going to start over here with the basics. So the first one is the survival kit, which is inside of the cockpit right there. This is where you'll get your power, your oxygen, and your hydrogen. Also, if you take some damage, it will heal you up. That is connected to a conveyor junction because in order for that to get O2 and H2, it needs to be connected to the O2H2 generator, which is actually in the back. So the conveyors did have to be connected to it. So we have a conveyor junction right there, then a conveyor which goes up to another conveyor junction, allowing these to be connected to the survival kit. Also with conveyor junctions, it has all sides have access, all 6 sides. So we have a vent there. On the other side, we have an oxygen tank, which will store oxygen when the O2H2 generator turns ice into oxygen. Right behind that, we have ourselves an hydrogen engine. This will produce power from the hydrogen that is made in the O2 generator. Now this thing has kind of weird access. Let's go ahead and grab one real quick. So engine, there we go. Let's go ahead and drag it down and we can see the access points. So this one has 2 access points. Let's go ahead and rotate it so it looks like it does while it's sitting on the ship. So is it like that? Yeah, it's like that. Down at the bottom of the hydrogen engine, you'll see that access point, which is on the right, which allows it to connect to the block below it. And then it has one in the front. And that's it, just those 2 access points. So the hydrogen engine is fed from the O2H2 generator, but as you can see, it is not connected to the O2H2 generator because the access points are here on the other side, on the bottom and the top right there. There's not an access point here, but the hydrogen engine does have an access point on the bottom of it, which is connected to a cargo container. Now with a large grade cargo container, this is the small cargo container. It's just like the conveyor junction. It does have access on all 6 sides, which means we connect to the access point on that engine. Then it goes to the back to the O2H2 generator, which has the access point on the back and on the front. So right now, everything that requires a conveyor is connected if you are a little bit inventive with the access points. Now, of course, for power, we also have 2 batteries, which supply power to this ship. So yeah, when it comes to that respawn pod, this is the mechanics. Now, at some point, we will be going into production, which will go into more detail about the survival kit. We also need to go into auction at some point, but yeah, that's for future videos. Until then, make sure to like and subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.